You don't pick against Brady.
If the Browns win that game Monday, you might record without me.
You are now listening to the Not Your Average Sports Fans podcast. Now here's your host, Alec Beichelman, and the fans.
Ladies, gentlemen, sports fans, it's been a little while, but we're going to do another player edition episode of Kris Mike on the mic here on Not Your Average Sports Fans podcast. Now, if you guys kind of paid attention, we're kind of pushing almost 100 episodes on the podcast, and we wanted to, personally, all of us, the fans, we'd love to thank you and for showing the listening, supporting the podcast. It's just fantastic. But we are pushing episode 89, and a few of the guys and I were chatting, and we decided to do a player special for episode 89, which it's a player personally close to my heart, and the guy is also nicknamed Agent 89. So for episode 89 of Not Your Average Sports Fans podcast, it is a player's edition of the one, the only, Steve Smith Sr. Now, I'll highlight Steve Smith Sr. He started his career with the Carolina Panthers, ended up with the Baltimore Ravens. He was a young stud, fun to watch, and personally, he was a player, one of my favorite players growing up, and actually got me into playing football, too, especially for his height of a receiver. Everyone always said, oh, he's too small, 5'9" out of receiver, he can't play. He's too small, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. And Steve Smith just woke up and showed everybody, hey, I'm here to ball, and this is why I do what I do. And it's just phenomenal watching Steve Smith on the field. And you can't go anywhere without knowing Steve Smith is somewhere on the field, especially the way he chatters, because he's one of the best trash talkers in the game. Pretty much, we got some his stats, and we got some little notes on here, and we're just gonna talk about how great Steve Smith was during his football career for my Carolina Panthers, and how he did in his whole career. So Stevan Latrell Smith Sr. was born May 12th, 1979. He was a former receiver for 16 years in the NFL. He played with the Carolina Panthers from 2001 when he was drafted to 2013. And then he also played for the Baltimore Ravens from 2014 to 2016. He played college football for the Utah Utes. At that time, they were in the Mountain West Conference, and then he was drafted third round in the 2001 NFL Draft. Smith, a 5-time Pro Bowl selection and 3-time All-Pro, emerged as one of the NFL's most productive wide receivers of the 21st century. He led the league in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns in 2005. So in 2005, he was actually a Triple Crown winner, one of the few receivers ever to do so. He played for the Panthers for 13 seasons before signing with the Ravens, and he is the Carolina Panthers' all-time leader in total touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. In 2011, he became the 35th player in NFL history to amass 10,000 receiving yards. At the time of his retirement, he ranked 7th in NFL career all-purpose yards, 7th in NFL career receiving yards, 12th in career receptions, and 25th in receiving touchdowns. Smith generated more than 1,000 all-purpose yards in 11 different seasons and at least 1,900 all-purpose yards in 4 of his first 5 seasons. So for high school, he attended the University High School in Los Angeles. He lettered in both football and track and field. When he played football in high school, he was a running back and defensive back, and he was an All-Metro League selection as well as All-California Intergalactic Federation selection. He graduated University High School in 1997. Fun fact for his track and field stats, he set a handful of school records, was named as an All-City selection as a high hurdler, and also excelled in the triple jump and 300-meter hurdles. He had personal best of 14.95 seconds in the 110-meter hurdles and 38.73 seconds in the 300-meter hurdles. After graduating, he actually attended Santa Monica College. He played a little JUCO for at least his first 2 years. While he was playing for Santa Monica, he quickly defined himself as a talented football player, and he earned himself a starting position. At the time, while he was at Santa Monica, he was actually teammates with future NFL wide receiver Chad Johnson, surprised fans of the small college teams with their unexpected talents. While impressing spectators with his performance on the football field, Santa Monica's head coach Robert Taylor encouraged Smith to not play for riches or fame, but to play so that he may earn a scholarship for a Division I school. He also advised both Steve Smith and Chad Johnson to not do touchdown celebrations. Steve Smith said, or as Steve Smith described it, they put the cuffs on us. But Steve Smith took it to heart, and excelled in academics, never missed a single day of classes while attending Santa Monica, and it got him a big boost because after completing 2 years at Santa Monica College, he transferred to the University of Utah, where he established himself as a standard wide receiver for the Utah Utes in the Mountain West, where he was a teammate of future NFL running back Mike Anderson. Now, we got a few stats for his college while he was at the University of Utah. Steve Smith did set a record for yards per catch with a 20.6 average. He was chosen to the Conference All-Star team twice. However, unfortunately, he missed their bowl game in the final season due to injury. But after the Blue-Gray All-Star game on December 25th, 2000, Steve Smith began to receive attention from various NFL scouts, and he was also named the offensive MVP of the East-West Shrine game on January 13th, 2001. And another fun fact about Steve Smith, he actually met his wife Angie at Utah. So it was kind of cool hearing the story. He went to Utah, he saw her, fell in love, and happily ever after. So coming into the 2001 season, the Carolina Panthers selected Steve Smith in the 3rd round, 74th pick overall during the 2001 NFL draft. Majority of his first year and within his first 2 seasons, he was mainly brought in as a kick returner, punt returner. He was a return specialist. So 2001, a majority of his rookie season, he was spit as the returner. But he was leading all rookies in net yardage with 1,994 yards, landing in 4th place among all NFL players behind Priest Holmes, Marshall Faulk, and Derek Mason, which is pretty solid people to be in the category with. In his first play as a professional football player, opening kickoff against the Minnesota Vikings, Steve Smith returned it for a touchdown, which was personally awesome. Unfortunately, the team finished 1-15 his rookie season, which their only win was the season opener against the Minnesota Vikings. 2002, he earned a starting position as a wide receiver, and he continued to still be the special teams returner. He finished the 2002 season with 54 receptions, 872 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 2003 season, which is a big year for us Panther fans. 2003 season, Steve Smith played a critical role for the Panthers offense and helped lead them to their first NFC title in franchise history. He finished the regular season with 88 receptions, 1,110 yards, and 7 touchdowns. This is the first he eclipsed the 1,000 receiving yard mark for the first time in his career. NFC divisional playoffs that year. Jake Delhomme draw back to pass and found Steve Smith running the seam, passed it. Steve Smith caught a 69-yard pass and ran it for a touchdown in the second overtime period. Defeated the St. Louis Rams 29-23. He finished the game with 6 catches, 163 yards, and the 1 touchdown. Won the championship game right after that, and the Carolina Panthers are making history playing their first Super Bowl, and it was Super Bowl 38. Super Bowl 38 in Houston. Kickoff. After the game, Steve Smith got 4 receptions, 80 yards, and a touchdown. And he returned the kickoff for 30 yards. Unfortunately, the Carolina Panthers lost the Super Bowl 32-29 to the New England Patriots off of a Adam Vinatieri game-winning field goal. Now, coming into the 2004 season, unfortunately, it was a short year for Steve Smith. First reception, he had 1 reception for 9 yards, and when he was tackled, he landed awkwardly, and Steve Smith suffered a severe break in his leg in the season opener against the Packers, and he was out for the remainder of the year. Before the injury, he managed to record 6 catches for 60 yards, and he even attempted a pass which fell incomplete. Okay, so there was more stats he had there too. But he made a reception, was running it, at least a 9-yard reception, and he got hurt. 2005 came along, and this was one hell of a comeback for Steve Smith. 2005 NFL season, Steve Smith recovered from his injury to have the best season of his career. He earned the Triple Crown, which is the receiving yards, leading the NFL in receptions, and leading the NFL in touchdowns. At this time, he was only the 3rd player. We know the 4th came recently. Jerry Rice in 1990, Sterling Sharp in 1992, Steve Smith in 2005, and now Cooper Kupp in the 2021 season. 4 players completing the Triple Crown, which is definitely hard to do for a receiver. Steve Smith becoming, at the time, the 3rd player to accomplish the feat in the Super Bowl era. He also returned 27 punts for 286 yards, had a 10.6 yards per punt return average. 2nd highest of his career. His rookie year was 10.7. He dominated the first 2 rounds of the NFL playoffs. Wildcard victory over the Giants. He caught 10 passes for 84 yards and a touchdown. He rushed for 12 and added another score. The next game in the divisional round, he They defeated the Chicago Bears. Smith had a franchise record 12 receptions for 218 yards and 2 touchdowns. NFC Championship, they played the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. He scored on a 59-yard punt return, but he was held at 33 receiving yards on 5 catches, and the Panthers unfortunately lost 34-14. But Steve Smith was named into the Pro Bowl along with teammates Jake Delhomme, Julius Peppers, and Mike Wall. And Steve Smith also won the 2005 NFL Comeback Player of the Year award. He also shared it with New England Patriot linebacker Teddy Bruschi. 2006, he returned to the field. He missed. He had a hamstring injury and had another injury before training camp. Missed 2 weeks of action. It was double covered frequently, but he still managed to battle through that and the injuries to finish the year. He had 83 receptions for 1,186 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was also invited to the 2007 Pro Bowl, second Pro Bowl in a row that he made, in his 3rd overall. And following that, his contract was running up after the season, and March 1st he signed the extension. His new extension was worth $45 million for 6 years. He started 15 games for the Panthers during the 2007 season, led Carolina with 87 catches, 1,002 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns, despite playing with 4 different starting quarterbacks due to injury for Jake Delhomme. 2008, he had an issue right at the start of training camp. He had an altercation with teammate Ken Lucas on August 1st. Broke his nose during a fight. He was sent home for the remainder of the day, and he apologized. The team gave him a 2-game suspension. Despite the 2-game suspension, he still was voted to play in the 2009 Pro Bowl. He had 78 receptions, 1,421 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns, leading the NFL in receiving yards per game. And when he returned from suspension, he scored his first touchdown of the season. Steve Smith actually presented the ball to Ken Lucas on the sideline. So that was kind of cool to try to give back after his suspension. 2009 season, he unfortunately, week 16, he broke his left forearm on a touchdown and again on a touchdown catch against the New York Giants. Sat out the final game of the year. He finished with 982 yards on 65 receptions and 7 touchdowns. 18 shy of a 5th consecutive 1,000-yard receiving season. And coming into the 2010 season, it was unfortunately Steve Smith's worst season as a starter since 2002. He did lead the team in both receptions and receiving yards, but he only had 46 catches for 554 yards, and he only caught 2 touchdown passes. Steve Smith's low numbers were due to the total lack of team offense behind rookie quarterback Jimmy Clausen. The Panthers finished last in most offensive categories with a 2-14 record, which was the worst in the 2010 season, securing the first pick in the 2011 draft. Steve Smith's dissatisfaction led to widespread rumors among the Panther fan base that the star receiver will want to be traded for the 2011 season. 2011 comes around. We have a new rookie quarterback by the name of Cam Newton. Steve Smith opened up, and he's not leaving Carolina. And Steve Smith opened up the 2011 season strong. He gained 178 yards and 2 touchdowns on 8 catches, including a 77-yard reception for a touchdown in the first game. And he followed his Week 1 performance with another 150-yard receiving game, but he had a fumble. On November 27th, 2011, Steve Smith surpassed a 1,000-yard receiving mark. During Week 14, he became the 35th player in NFL history to reach the 10,000-yard receiving mark after a 125-yard performance against the Atlanta Falcons. Smith reached a total of 1,394 yards on 79 catches and was 1 catch away from earning the 700 receiving mark. And in the 2011 season, Steve Smith was selected to his 5th Pro Bowl. 2012 season, he also signed a 3-year extension worth $18 million. He played all 16 games in 2012. He had 73 receptions, 1,174 yards, and 4 touchdowns. 2013, Steve Smith still had to continue to play well, even though he had 64 receptions, which was his lowest since 2010. Steve Smith did On December 22nd, 2013, Steve Smith did receive a PCL sprain against the Saints. Panthers came out of the game with the win, beat the Saints 17-13. Steve Smith received his 800th reception in the 2013 season also. And there was actually a Monday night game Carolina and New England had, and Aqib Talib was talking trash, and him and Steve Smith were going at it just like they did when Aqib Talib was back in Tampa. Of course, you had that NFC rivalry there. And right after the game, someone came up in an interview and asked Steve Smith what's going on between you and Talib, and Steve Smith said, and quote, "I don't know, you go and ask him because he didn't finish the game. Ice up, son, ice up." And the ice up, son quote is still cherishable to this day. Unfortunately, March 13th, 2014, Steve Smith was released by the Carolina Panthers. However, he wasn't a free agent for long. Baltimore Ravens got on the phone, got on the horn, and even John Harbaugh was preaching that, hey, we need a receiver, let's go after Steve Smith. So the next day, Steve Smith Sr. signed a deal with the Ravens. It was a 3-year contract with the Baltimore Ravens worth $11.5 million with a $3.5 million bonus, and he signed that the next day on March 14th, 2014. Prior to signing with the Ravens, Steve Smith stated that if he happened to meet his former team, the Panthers again, to put your goggles on, because there's going to be blood and guts everywhere. So Steve Smith's already looking forward to the game against his former team. The Ravens season opener in 2014 against the Cincinnati Bengals. Steve Smith started out like Steve Smith would, caught 7 passes, 118 yards, and an 80-yard touchdown. Unfortunately, the Ravens lost 23-16, but Steve Smith was still playing solid. Week 3 against the Cleveland Browns, Smith caught 5 passes for 101 yards, including a 32-yard reception that set up the game-winning field goal. Ravens won that game 23-21. Now, Week 4, Steve Smith, Carolina Panthers come to Baltimore. Steve Smith's facing his old team. Ravens' second possession of the game, Joe Flacco threw a pass intended for Owen Daniels, but he threw the pass that was tipped, and it landed in the arms of Steve Smith, who took the ball to the end zone for a 61-yard touchdown. Later in the game, Joe Flacco fumbled a snap, he picked it up, and threw a ball that was to have covered Steve Smith, but he caught it in the back of the end zone, despite being held by corner Melvin White. Smith finished that game with 7 catches, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns, as the Baltimore Ravens defeated the Carolina Panthers 38-10. And after the game, he's just hooting and hollering and laughing. He looked at the Panthers and said, "Time to send your ass back home. While you're at it, mow my yard." Typical Steve Smith talking trash. It's just fun. As odd as it sounds, it's just fun to hear him talk trash. In Week 6, Steve Smith caught a 56-yard touchdown pass in the game, which Joe Flacco threw a career-high 5 touchdown passes and set the record for fastest time to throw. Steve Smith did finish the game with 5 catches, 110 yards, and that 56-yard score. Week 15, Steve Smith caught his 900th reception against the Jaguars. Ravens won that game 20-12. Week 17, Steve Smith reached the single-season 1,000-yard mark for the 8th time in his career, and in that game, the Ravens defeated the Browns 20-10, and they clinched a playoff berth. Steve Smith finished the 2014 regular season with 79 receptions, 1,065 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He unfortunately did fumble twice, but he only lost the one. The wild card round of the playoffs, Steve Smith caught 5 passes for 101 yards as the Ravens defeated the Steelers for the first time in the playoffs. Divisional round, Steve caught 3 passes for 44 yards and a touchdown, but unfortunately the Ravens lost and had their season ended by the eventual Super Bowl champion New England Patriots, which was Super Bowl 49. 2015, August 10th, during a press conference, Steve Smith announced that the upcoming season will be his last. He did share some memories and was talking about he sat down with the family and they decided 2015 was going to be his last season. During the Ravens' third preseason game against the Redskins, Steve Smith was ejected with Washington corner Chris Culver. Steve Smith's oldest boy went to Twitter saying, "First time I ever gotten to watch a game with my dad. Thanks, NFL." And the Ravens' Twitter account tweeted that Steve was ejected for a skirmish, and his son replied to it by saying, "Actually got ejected for balling too hard." Steve Smith was also named the starting punt returner after Week 1. At 36, he was and is among the oldest punt returners in league history. Ravens' first win against the Steelers in Week 4, Steve Smith was forced to leave the game in the third quarter due to a lower back injury he suffered from after a hit from linebacker Lawrence Timmons. 2 days later, it was announced that Steve broke 4 of his ribs in the Week 4 game. In Week 8 against the San Diego Chargers, Steve Smith tore his Achilles tendon, and it was announced that he will be out for the rest of the 2015 season. He ended the season having having played 7 games, racking up 46 catches for 670 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, I know there's a handful of people and even other chatter going along like, okay, Steve Smith's not ending on an injury. He's not ending on an injury. Well, on December 30th, 2015, Steve Smith announced that he will be returning to the Ravens for the 2016 season. He's not going out on an injury. That is never the Steve Smith way. So for his final season, he had another solid year with the Ravens. He caught 70 passes, 799 yards, and 5 touchdowns. In week 4, he had his only 100-plus yard game of the season against the Oakland Raiders. He had 8 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. In the games, Steve Smith finally passed Andre Johnson to become the NFL active leader in receiving yards. He also reached the 1,000 reception mark, the 14th player to reach the milestone. On January 2nd, 2017, Steve Smith officially announced his retirement from the NFL. He retired with 1,031 receptions for 14,731 yards and 81 touchdowns. And that's all the stats I got and highlights for the season on Steve Smith. But I'll just finish. We'll have a little wrap up here. It's just literally, I'll be turning on the TV, watching highlights and anything, and there's not one highlight where I didn't have Steve Smith Sr. just showing what it is. From his talking trash in the Atlanta Falcons in 2005, where he scores a touchdown, looks at the camera and says, "If you see my face, that means I scored," only to turn around, score again, look in the camera and say, "If you see my face again, that means I scored again," to even his ice up son comment on the Keep to Leave. But the most important one, and this one still stings, after the Week 4 game in 2014 when he played the Carolina Panthers, he actually got the game ball, and they did a speech, and he just sit there, chuckle, and look up, and he just said, "An old man playing a young man's game. Some of y'all are gonna have to ice up." And it's just phenomenal even listening to him just chat even. He's just phenomenal. Like I said, he was the inspiration for me to play receiver when I played football, and he's just phenomenal. Even a guy his height, just going out there proving everybody wrong. His rookie year, he made it to the Pro Bowl as a specialist. He wanted to run and play with the receivers, and he couldn't run and play with the receivers because one of the coaches was like, "No, this is for the receivers. You're not a receiver." Walks away, and the then special teams coordinator who was calling the Pro Bowl, which interesting fact was actually John Harbaugh. He looked at Steve and said, "Steve, you can play receiver. Go prove them wrong." What better way to show them than in the Pro Bowl? So then he ended up getting a rotation in and showing how he is as a receiver, and then that just boosted his receiver stock for the Panthers. Now, when Carolina released him, John Harbaugh personally reached out. I believe John Harbaugh personally reached out to Steve Smith saying, "We're going to offer you a deal. We want you to listen." Because Baltimore literally was on the phone with Steve Smith trying to get him to go to Baltimore. And Baltimore wasn't far from Charlotte because his biggest thing was he didn't want his family to leave Charlotte, where if it's Baltimore, he could just do a flight and come back home to his family. That was his biggest part of him going to a different NFL team. Now, there is a few clips of him. He sits down and did interviews. NFL Network actually ran a Football Life on Steve Smith, which definitely check it out. It's phenomenal. They did a great job with it. And I believe ESPN had one of their E60 shows and had Steve Smith in it too. But definitely worth the watch. And it was definitely, I'm just ecstatic to talk about him for an episode because, like I said, he was definitely a player I grew up watching, and he's still somebody that I grew up watching, and I'm going to be talking about him probably for my entire sports career. So, well, that's all we got on this player edition of Steve Smith Sr. Definitely be on the lookout. We definitely have some more player specials come in, and we're discussing and hoping to do more, and we're getting closer to our 100th episode. You've been checking out Kris Mike on the mic here, and we will thank you for listening to Not Your Average Sports Fans Podcast.
On that note, buddy, I think we're good to get out of here. But I think that is all we're gonna have, sir.
I feel like it's a good stopping point.
It is time to go to bed.
Thank you for listening to the Not Your Average Sports Fan podcast. Please give a review and smash that like and follow button.
Where we going?
Ralphie's?
Yes, sir.
Sounds good.
Cool.